All right. So in this video, we will be looking at beyond budgeting. As I said briefly, the issue is that there are a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, a lot of problems with traditional budgeting, and therefore, companies have recognized, especially companies that have non-traditional environments around them, very fast-paced, highly changing, highly dynamic. So they have to respond fast to customers, etc. So then traditional budgeting doesn't really add a lot of value. That is when beyond budgeting started to become or started to emerge as a prominent concept. So let's try to understand it. um, it's an approach to performance management and control that tries to resolve the weaknesses and limitations of traditional approaches. And there is really no one particular definition. Even in your study text, the thing we note is that since 2017, where beyond budgeting, or 16, yeah, since 2016, where beyond budgeting was introduced, um, the every time a new version or new edition of the Kaplan text comes out, the definition changes. The definition is different. So now we have this: beyond budgeting is the generic term given to the body of practices intended to replace traditional budgeting as a management model. So you will notice that even though the word budgeting is used, you shouldn't think of this as a budgeting system. It's not like zero-based budgeting, activity-based budgeting, incremental-based budgeting. That's not what beyond budgeting is. Beyond budgeting means literally beyond budgeting. It's moving on from budgeting, right? Traditional budgeting. That's what it means. Some students tend to think, oh, okay, so if I ask what are the different types of budgeting systems, they say beyond budgeting as an answer, in addition to zero-based, activity-based. We don't pull beyond budgeting into that group of budgeting systems. No, this is actually literally moving beyond it. I really want you to understand this. Okay, so it's a body of practices intended to replace traditional budgeting, not to do budgeting as a management model. So it's a management approach. It's a leadership approach. It's a way you run a company rather than budgeting only. We will look at it because where budgeting fits, traditional budgeting, where it fits is in the traditional sense of leadership, right? It's where general command and control, planning, control, and decision making, traditional management accounting environment operations. That's where traditional budgeting fits. So it's really one uh, piece of traditional leadership. But what beyond budgeting is, no, we don't have to do the traditional leadership approach. Let's move beyond budgeting and let's look at an alternate leadership approach. That's where these body of practices come into play. The core concept is the need to move from a business model based on centralized organizational hierarchies. So that's what we traditionally see, that organizational hierarchies are centralized, um, and that they exert control through that. So you move from centralized organizational hierarchies and control to organizations based on empowerment and adaptation. So back in the day, you had central leadership, departments, functions, and budgets. But now, beyond budgeting proposes that you move on from that and you go for empowering and adapting. Those are the two key words that are that we can use to understand budgeting or beyond budgeting. A range of techniques. So what happens is, in order to empower and in order to have an adaptive capability, in order to respond faster, you use a range of techniques such as rolling forecasts, market related targets, which takes into account the external environment, and you replace all the traditional components of the leadership with these kind of concepts. So, suitability wise, BB approaches are commonly used in organizations that face regular environmental changes and or where continuous improvement is critical to the organization's success. Right. So, it's very well suited for companies that are new, that are modern, that change fast, that requires fast response, etc. Okay, so let's see what kind of practices does beyond budgeting involve, and how I want you to do it. Learn it this way. Whenever we go through a practice, what you have to do is you have to compare and contrast in your mind, thinking, is this the practice that exists in traditional budgeting? And in almost all the time, it's either no or it's either very minimal. That's what you will see, right? That so the practices that are proposed under a beyond budgeting mechanism, those practices are more empowering, more adaptive, more flexible, more open, rather than the red tape, bureaucratic command and control approach that you see in traditional approaches. Okay, so area of best practice, governance and transparency. How many companies can you say in traditional budgeting are transparent? Top down approach doesn't really work. Only the directors know what's going on. The lower level senior management, all of them, they barely understand the numbers. And sometimes they think, from where did these numbers come from? I mean, who set these budgets? Right? And I've literally heard people, operational staff, blaming senior leadership, saying that they don't understand anything about the business. They don't know what they're doing. And whether that claim can be true or not, if that's what they feel, then the leadership has failed. So governance and transparency plays a big role. It allows that the missions are set on terms of values rather than profit. Governance is through shared values and sound judgment, not rules and regulations. And information is open and transparent. So there's a lot of visibility, and people across the organization, whether they are from a lower hierarchy or upper tier, they know what's going on and they understand the reasons. This does empower. When you know what's going on, when you have better information, it does empower. Accountable teams. So this is another aspect. A network of accountable teams who are empowered and trusted to regulate their performance. So what traditional budgeting did was it sets the budget and it tries to control them by tracking the budget. They don't really empower. They say you have to do this. You do this, you get a bonus. Simple. But rather than that, beyond budgeting actually says, look, this is the budget, and you can also participate in it, in preparing it, and you're empowered. You can decide how to achieve this. You have the freedom, and we trust you. More than everything, that is big. When employees hear that the senior leadership is ready to trust them, and that is more motivating, because people tend not to break their trust. People don't like to break trust. When someone says, I trust you, it's very valuable, right? So employees feel the same way. So when the company chooses to say that they trust, employees feel more connected, employees feel more loyal, and that in itself is more than enough motivation for them to work harder. There's a high degree of freedom offered, responsible for leader relationships. So uh, with power comes responsibility. When they are empowered, they have to be careful and they have to manage their relationships better. And budgets can be still used, but a high level of bottom up approach is being used. So lower level people are consulted, their participation, their opinions are taken into consideration when budgets when at team level budgets are being set. Goals, targets, and rewards. So managers are given a range of challenging but controllable goals and targets linked to shareholder value. So rather than saying these figures are your goals, the goals are actually set with an open forum, open understanding that these are challenging. Everybody knows they are challenging. And the budget holders, the people who are supposed to chase the budgets, they still have control also. They can move, they can shift the budget around depending on logical reasonings. They have a legitimate reason to shift a budget, they can do so. So that freedom is part of empowerment. And the goals and targets are very open, because ultimately it's about profits, no? So they know that they are, for example, if you have a sales team and their sales target is in number of units, that number of units is clearly linked and transparently provided, saying if you achieve this number, we can hit an ROI of this percent. That is why we are saying that you need to hit this number. So now the team understands that even though for them the PO target is a number of unit or volume target, they know that if they hit the volume, what's it feeding onto? What's the bigger picture? What's the reason of it? So when that information is there, people are quite empowered. People think that they are part and parcel of the bigger business. And that in itself is motivation. Targets will often be based on external benchmarks. So a lot of external information is taken into account, practical challenges, market information. Innovation and continuous improvement is encouraged and rewarded. So you're encouraging empowerment, you're valuing loyalty, you're giving them freedom, and you're pushing them to innovate, come up with new thinkings, new methods of dealing with issues, and to promote continuous improvement as well, where TQM and Kaizen can play a big role. And finally, planning and control. So planning, it's not like you plan for the 1 year and then you go ahead. No, planning is inclusive. Everybody has a role to play in it. So everybody, partakes in it, and it's continuous. So plans can change. The company is openly accepting that the fact that plans can change. They're willing to, be considerate. Rolling budgets are heavily used, and the focus is on the future. You don't if things happen in the past, whatever variances, you don't really worry too much about those. You try to gain intelligence from it, but your concern is in the future. Your focus is in the future. This is kind of how beyond budgeting works. So you see, in this type of leadership approach, there is really no room for traditional budgets. Don't have incremental and activity based and zero based, because the conversation and the type of conversation and the amount of power people have, all right, all the tactical level, operation level staff have, the amount of involvement, the amount of freedom they have, their motivations, all of those are different in a beyond budgeting environment. So as I said, it's not necessarily a particular budgeting system necessarily. It's a way of leadership. It's a way of managing a company. So here you have the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are what we've looked at. Now, by talking about all the principles, let's try to focus on the disadvantages then. There are, so even if it feels good, even if the motivation and the mood around things are better, this is complicated. It's unless you have good leadership that really understands how to enforce this method, this can get really complicated and can get messy very fast. If benchmarks and targets are viewed as being unachievable, then effort to achieve them is reduced rather than improved. So this is really where trusting too much and giving more power actually can hit back. So of course, there's always, so again, it's a matter of leadership. Again, it's a matter of the setting the limits. Even though you give freedom, you can't give them complete freedom. Even though you empower them, you cannot like rein the hands of the company into them, right? You have limits, and they have to operate within those limits. If you think that, okay, we set the budget at 100 units, and there is a flexibility, if you have logical reasonings without informing the board, you can shift the budget target within a standard deviation of 5%. So without saying that you can change the budget any way you want, where they say where they think, okay, my initial target was 100, but looks like it's difficult, so I'm going to shift the budget to 90, because 90 is the one they can hit easily. So rather than that, you say your standard deviation is 5%. You can shift it, but there's a limit of 5%. So you can either bring it to 95, or you can either bring it to 105. Only 5 you can change. So in a situation where the operational team sees that they can only hit 90 very easily, they also know that the maximum they can reduce the target is 95. So they will aspire to hit at least that 5. Easily 90 and another 5, even if they want to shift the budget target to a lower 95 figure. So as you can see, it's you have to be careful. Another way people deal with this is allowing stretch targets. So they say you have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. These are the 5 target levels. If you achieve level 1, this is what you get. If you achieve level 3, this is what you get. So that's another way to address it. Although employees should be bound by a clear mission and set of values, sometimes organizational goals are less clear and are not communicated. So there can be challenges in communication, challenges in leadership, challenges in transparency. And also, just because you want to be transparent doesn't mean that you have to always be transparent with everything. That can really be bad. There has to be careful judgment in deciding that you do maintain a tone of transparency, because if you don't want to, and if you are deliberately and connivingly and cunningly choosing what information is given to employees, that is just unethical. So not that, not borderlining on that, but really just focusing on what is transparency for us, but being careful with what information you provide, because you don't want everyone to know everything from a strategic standpoint. There is a lot of resistance because this is not the traditional approach, and old habits die hard. So people are used to a certain way, even though it may be tedious, even though it may be, for example, if you bring in something like beyond budgeting, some of the management accountants who do bulk of their work is budgeting. All of that work will be eliminated, which means they know that out of the 40-hour work week, they used to do 25 hours of budgeting work, and now it's going to drop down to 5, because half of the work or more of the work, most of the work you wanted to do now doesn't exist anymore because you're doing beyond budgeting. So then that employee might start thinking, this is not something that they would like to face, and therefore resist. And if that resistance grows, and if that resistance is collective, that it comes on as a collective ideology within the company staff, then that pushback might actually deviate us from adopting beyond budgeting, and we might actually think this doesn't really work, even though it is just a deliberate pushback from the side of the employees. So it's very important to train people, to converse with people, to keep an open line of communication with people, to address their issues, especially during that pace of change happening. Those their issues, their concerns must be responded to, addressed. They need to have help to ensure them and assure them that their jobs are safe and things like that. It may be very difficult or impractical for organizations to adopt the culture of decentralization, especially if they have been in business for a very long time and they're used to a certain way. And this whole thing beyond budgeting, the only way it can work is if there's a lot of money, because it does require a large amount of investment and a large amount of cost. So unless that kind of backing, because you need to have the systems mostly, because it's all about the quality of information. So you need to track the information, you need to have softwares that can analyze the information, and you need to have reporting angles, maybe in the same software or different softwares, that send out this information on a real time basis, or on a fast basis to the relevant stakeholders at the relevant time, so that they can be responsive to keep them in their edge of the seat. So when you consider all of this, there are practical challenges to beyond budgeting. However, it is by far a very superior approach of budgeting, and that is what we understand when we try to analyze and break down beyond budgeting. There is an additional note that I will possibly include in the shared drive, which you can access, but this is the main understanding you need to have about beyond budgeting. One last reminder: it's not a traditional budgeting system. It's literally beyond budgeting. I'll see you in a different video. Thank you so much.